Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her palms as she walked through the entrance of the Riverside Shooting Club. The smell of gunpowder and leather filled her nostrils, mixing with the sound of distant gunfire echoing from the indoor ranges. She clutched her registration papers tightly, her heart beating faster with each step toward the front desk. The club was everything she had imagined and more. Trophies lined the walls, photographs of champions holding their awards, and display cases filled with vintage firearms. This was where the best shooters in the county came to train, compete, and prove themselves. Today, Sarah hoped to join their ranks. "Can I help you?" The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, looked up from her computer screen. Her tone was polite but slightly impatient, as if she had been interrupted from more important work. "I'm here to register for the monthly precision shooting competition," Sarah said, sliding her paperwork across the counter. "I called yesterday and spoke to someone about the requirements." The receptionist glanced at the papers, then back at Sarah with a puzzled expression. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This isn't a beginner's class. This is serious competitive shooting." Sarah felt her cheeks flush but kept her voice steady. "I understand that. I've been practicing for months, and I believe I'm ready to compete. Have you ever fired a rifle before?" The question came with a slight smirk, as if the answer was obvious. "Yes, I have experience with firearms," Sarah replied, though she didn't elaborate on the extent of her training. She had learned early in life that people often judged her based on appearance rather than ability. At 24, Sarah stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a slight build that made her look even younger. Her long dark hair was always neatly braided, and she preferred simple clothes that didn't draw attention. Nothing about her appearance suggested she could handle the recoil of a high-powered rifle or maintain the steady nerves required for precision shooting. The receptionist processed her registration with obvious reluctance, explaining the rules and safety requirements as if Sarah were a child. "The competition is next Saturday. Entry fee is $75. You'll need to provide your own equipment, including rifle, ammunition, and safety gear. Are you certain you have everything you need?" "I'm prepared," Sarah answered, though she wondered if the woman would have asked the same questions to a male competitor. As she left the front desk, Sarah noticed a group of men gathered near the entrance to the practice ranges. They were clearly experienced shooters, dressed in tactical gear and discussing their latest scores with the confidence of people who belonged here. One of them, a tall man with a thick beard and arms covered in military tattoos, glanced her way. "Lost," he called out, causing the others to turn and look. "The yoga studio is down the street." Laughter rippled through the group. Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment, but she forced herself to walk past them without responding. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before and knew that engaging would only make things worse. "Hey, I'm serious," the bearded man continued, his voice carrying across the lobby. "This place can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Maybe you should start with a BB gun." More laughter followed, but Sarah kept walking. She found the practice range assignment board and located her reserved lane number. The walk down the corridor felt endless, with every eye seeming to follow her progress. Whispers and chuckles echoed behind her, making her question whether she was making a terrible mistake. The practice range was a long, narrow room with individual shooting stations separated by thick concrete barriers. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the space, and the constant crack of gunfire made conversation impossible without ear protection. Sarah found her assigned lane and began unpacking her equipment case. Her rifle was nothing fancy, a standard bolt-action model that she had purchased secondhand and spent countless hours learning to maintain and operate. She had saved for months to afford proper ammunition and had practiced religiously at a small outdoor range 30 miles from her apartment. Every weekend, she drove out to the countryside and spent hours perfecting her stance, breathing, and trigger control. The motivation for all this training went back to her childhood. Sarah's father had been a police officer who taught her to shoot when she was 12 years old. He believed every person should know how to handle a firearm safely and accurately. Those weekend lessons in the woods behind their house were some of her happiest memories, filled with his patient instruction and genuine pride in her natural ability. "Remember, Sarah," he would say, "shooting isn't about strength or size. It's about focus, control, and respect for the weapon. You have steady hands and a good eye. Don't let anyone tell you that's not enough." Her father had died in a car accident when she was 16, but his words stayed with her. She hadn't touched a gun for years after his death, but recently she had felt drawn back to the sport. Something about the precision and discipline required appealed to her, and she discovered that she still possessed the natural talent he had recognized long ago. As Sarah loaded her rifle and adjusted her position at the shooting bench, she noticed several men at nearby lanes watching her with obvious amusement. They weren't even trying to hide their stares or the smiles on their faces. One of them, a heavy-set man wearing a camouflage cap, leaned over to his companion and said something that made them both laugh. Sarah put on her ear protection and tried to block out everything except the target downrange. The familiar weight of the rifle felt good in her hands, and she took a deep breath to steady her nerves. This was what she had trained for. This was where she belonged, regardless of what anyone else thought. She fired her first shot, feeling the satisfying recoil against her shoulder. Through the scope, she could see the bullet hole in the target paper, slightly off-center but well within the scoring ring. Not bad for a warm-up shot with people watching and commenting on every move she made. The second shot was better, closer to the bullseye. The third was even better. Sarah fell into the rhythm that had become second nature during her months of practice, each shot building on the last, each one bringing her closer to the level of precision she knew she could achieve. But the whispers and stares continued. Every time she paused to reload or check her target, she could hear fragments of conversation from the men around her. Comments about beginners, jokes about her size, speculation about how long it would take before she gave up and went home. By the time she finished her practice session, Sarah's jaw was sore from clenching her teeth. Her shots had been good, better than good actually, but she knew that proving herself would require more than just hitting targets during practice. The real test would come during the competition, when scores were recorded and rankings determined. As she packed up her equipment, the bearded man from the lobby appeared at her lane. Up close, she could see his name tag read Mike and that he wore the club's instructor certification badge. "Not bad for a first-timer," he said, though his tone suggested he was surprised by her competence. "You might want to consider starting with the novice division though. The monthly competition can be pretty intense for someone without tournament experience." Sarah looked up from securing her rifle case. "I appreciate the advice, but I registered for the open division. I believe I can compete at that level." Mike shrugged and walked away, but she heard him mutter to his friends about stubborn beginners who don't know their limitations. That night, Sarah lay in bed thinking about the day's events. Part of her was angry at the treatment she had received, but another part was more determined than ever to prove herself. She had 1 week to prepare for the competition, one chance to show everyone that they had misjudged her completely. The next morning, she called her supervisor at the office where she worked as an accountant and requested a few vacation days. If she was going to compete against the best shooters in the county, she needed every possible hour of practice time. This competition would be her opportunity to honor her father's memory and demonstrate that skill and determination mattered more than appearance or assumptions. The week ahead would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about herself. But Sarah Martinez was ready for that challenge, regardless of how many people expected her to fail. The week that followed was the most intense period of Sarah's life. She arrived at the outdoor range every morning at dawn, when the air was still and the light was perfect for precision shooting. The drive took 40 minutes each way, but she made it gladly, knowing that every shot would bring her closer to the level she needed to reach. Her routine became almost ritualistic. She would set up her equipment in complete silence, running through the same checklist her father had taught her years ago. Check the rifle action, inspect the barrel, verify the scope settings, and ensure every piece of ammunition was perfect. Then came the physical preparation, stretching exercises to relax her muscles and breathing techniques to calm her mind. The first day back at the range, Sarah shot a personal best score. The grouping of her shots was tighter than ever before, with most bullets landing within a 2-inch circle at 100 yards. By the third day, she was consistently hitting targets that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. Her confidence grew with each session, but so did her awareness of the enormous challenge ahead. On Thursday, she decided to research her competition. Using the shooting club's website and local newspapers, she learned about the other competitors who would be participating in Saturday's event. The names read like a who's who of regional shooting champions. There was Marcus Thompson, a former military sniper who had won the monthly competition 4 times in the past year. James Rodriguez, a police detective whose precision shooting had made him a legend in law enforcement circles. And David Chen, a college engineering professor who approached shooting with scientific precision and had developed his own custom ammunition. Each of these men had decades of experience and numerous trophies to their names. They had competed against each other so many times that their rivalry was well documented in local shooting publications. Sarah realized she was not just entering a competition, she was inserting herself into a long-running battle between established experts. That evening, she called her mother for the first time in weeks. The conversation started with the usual topics, work and weather and family news, but eventually Sarah found herself talking about the shooting competition. "Your father would be so proud," her mother said quietly. "He always believed you had a special gift with firearms. Do you remember how excited he got when you hit your first bullseye?" Sarah did remember. She had been 13 years old, and it had taken her months of practice to finally center a shot perfectly on the target. Her father had whooped with joy and insisted on taking a photograph of her holding the target. That picture still sat on her dresser, faded but treasured. "I'm nervous, Mom. These are serious competitors with years of experience. Part of me wonders if I'm being foolish." "Sarah, your father taught you something important about competition. It's not about being the strongest or the most experienced. It's about who can perform when it matters most. You have his steady hands and his determination. Trust in that." Friday morning brought unexpected rain, which meant no outdoor practice. Instead, Sarah spent the day at an indoor range closer to home, working on her fundamentals at shorter distances. The facility was smaller and less intimidating than the shooting club, staffed by an elderly man named Frank who had been teaching marksmanship for 40 years. "You've got natural talent," Frank observed after watching her shoot for an hour. "Your form is textbook perfect, and your consistency is remarkable. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Sarah told him about her father and the upcoming competition. Frank listened with growing interest, asking detailed questions about her preparation and her goals. "I've seen a lot of shooters come and go," he said finally. "The ones who succeed aren't necessarily the ones with the best equipment or the most experience. They're the ones who can stay calm when everyone is watching and the pressure is highest. You seem like you have that quality." That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Mike, the instructor at the shooting club. His tone was less dismissive than it had been during their first meeting, though still somewhat condescending. "I wanted to check in about tomorrow's competition," he said. "Have you given any more thought to starting in the novice division? There's no shame in building experience gradually." "I appreciate your concern," Sarah replied, "but I'm committed to competing in the open division." There was a pause. "Look, I'm trying to help you here. These guys you'll be competing against, they've been doing this for 20 years or more. Marcus Thompson was trained by the military. James Rodriguez has won state championships. They're not going to go easy on you just because you're new." Sarah felt a flash of irritation. "I never asked them to go easy on me. I just want the chance to compete fairly." After hanging up, she wondered if Mike was genuinely trying to be helpful or simply trying to discourage her from embarrassing herself. Either way, his call only strengthened her resolve to prove that she belonged in the competition. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, perfect conditions for precision shooting. Sarah arrived at the club 2 hours before the competition began, wanting to familiarize herself with the range setup and get comfortable with the environment. The facility looked different on competition day, with official scoring sheets posted and judges preparing their equipment. Other competitors were arriving as well, and Sarah recognized several faces from her research. Marcus Thompson was exactly as imposing as she had expected, a tall man with gray hair and military bearing who moved with quiet confidence. James Rodriguez looked like a detective from Central Casting, with observant eyes and careful movements. David Chen appeared more academic but no less serious, examining his custom rifle with scientific precision. The trash talk began almost immediately. As Sarah was checking in with the competition officials, she overheard Marcus talking to his friends. "Did you see we have a new competitor today? Cute little thing, probably saw it in a movie and thought it looked easy." "Give her credit for trying," James replied. "Though I suspect she'll be heading home after the first round." David was more diplomatic but equally dismissive. "Everyone has to start somewhere. Hopefully she'll stick with it and build her skills gradually." Sarah kept her expression neutral as she collected her competitor number and official target sheets. She had expected this kind of reception, but hearing it in person still stung. The judges explained the competition format: 3 rounds of 20 shots each, with increasing difficulty and distance. The total possible score was 600 points, and anything above 550 was considered excellent. As the competitors moved to the firing line for the first round, Sarah noticed that she was the only woman participating. She had known this intellectually, but seeing it in person was still jarring. 24 men and her, all preparing to compete for the same prize. The weight of representation felt heavy on her shoulders. The first round was fired at 50 yards, the closest distance of the competition. Sarah's lane assignment placed her between Marcus Thompson and a younger man named Kevin who worked as a security guard. Both men were friendly enough during equipment setup, but she could sense their amusement at her presence. "First competition?" Kevin asked as he adjusted his rifle scope. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. "It's always exciting," Marcus added. "Just remember to have fun with it. The scores don't really matter when you're learning." Sarah nodded politely but inwardly bristled at the assumption that she was just there for the experience. When the range officer called for competitors to load and prepare to fire, she felt her heart rate increase despite her attempts to stay calm. The first shot of the competition echoed across the range, followed quickly by others as the 25 competitors began their rounds. Sarah forced herself to ignore the sounds around her and focus entirely on her target. She controlled her breathing, aligned her sight picture, and squeezed the trigger with the same smooth motion she had practiced thousands of times. The shot felt good the moment it left the rifle. Through her scope, she could see a perfect hole in the 10 ring, the highest scoring area of the target. Her second shot was equally precise, as was her third. By the time she completed the first round, Sarah had fired 20 shots with remarkable consistency. When the targets were retrieved for scoring, Sarah noticed several competitors glancing her way with surprise. Marcus Thompson, who had been joking with friends throughout the round, was now studying her target with obvious interest. Her score for the first round was 194 out of 200 possible points, putting her in third place behind only Marcus and James. "Nice shooting," Kevin said, his tone now carrying genuine respect. "That was really impressive for a first competition." Sarah thanked him but could see the wheels turning in the minds of the other competitors. She was no longer the amusing novice who would provide entertainment before going home. She was a serious threat to their established order, and the dynamic of the competition had suddenly changed. The second round would be fired at 100 yards, and the third at 150 yards. The distances where Sarah had practiced most extensively and where her natural talent would be most evident. As she prepared for the next phase of the competition, Sarah realized that her week of intensive training had been just the beginning. The real test was about to start. The atmosphere around the firing line changed dramatically as competitors prepared for the second round. What had been casual conversation and friendly jokes was now replaced by intense focus and careful equipment adjustments. Sarah could feel the shift in how others perceived her, and she noticed several competitors studying her technique between rounds. Marcus Thompson approached her during the break, his expression serious. "That was some fine shooting in the first round. Where did you train?" "My father taught me the basics when I was young," Sarah answered. "I've been practicing at various ranges to prepare for today."
Marcus nodded slowly. Your father taught you well. That kind of consistency doesn't come from luck.
James Rodriguez joined the conversation, his detective instincts clearly engaged.
I've never seen you at any local competitions before. Have you shot competitively elsewhere? This is my first competition anywhere, Sarah said honestly.
Both men exchanged glances that spoke volumes. A complete novice had just outshot half the field in the opening round, including several shooters with decades of experience. Word spread quickly among the other competitors, and Sarah noticed more eyes following her as she prepared her equipment for the 100-yard round. The second round setup took longer, as targets had to be repositioned at the greater distance and wind conditions evaluated.
Sarah used the time to review her notes from practice sessions at similar distances.
She had learned to account for slight variations in bullet trajectory and had developed consistent reference points for different shooting positions. Kevin, the security guard who had been shooting next to her, struck up another conversation. I've been competing here for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone shoot like that in their first event.
Are you sure you haven't done this before? Sarah smiled at the question she was hearing repeatedly. I'm sure.
But I've put in a lot of practice time over the past few months.
It shows, Kevin replied. Just so you know, the guys are starting to take you pretty seriously.
Marcus hasn't looked this focused during a competition in years. As the range officer called for the second round to begin, Sarah felt a different kind of pressure than she had experienced earlier. In the first round, she had been dismissed as a beginner who might accidentally shoot well. Now she was being watched as a legitimate competitor who needed to prove her first round wasn't a fluke. The targets at 100 yards looked significantly smaller through her scope, requiring greater precision and steadier nerves. Sarah took her position and went through her pre-shot routine, the same sequence of movements and mental checks that had become automatic during her intensive practice week. Her first shot at the longer distance felt perfect the moment she fired it. The rifle recoil was smooth, her follow-through was clean, and she could see through the scope that the bullet had found the center of the target. The second shot was equally precise, as was the third. As the round progressed, Sarah became aware of an unusual silence from the other competitors. The normal sounds of casual conversation and equipment adjustment had been replaced by intense concentration. She could sense that something special was happening but tried not to let it affect her shooting routine. By the time she fired her 20th shot of the second round, Sarah knew she had achieved something remarkable. Every shot had felt controlled and precise, with no wild throws or technical errors. When the targets were retrieved and scored, her suspicions were confirmed. She had shot a perfect score of 200 points in the second round, hitting the 10 ring with every single shot. The scoring announcement sent ripples of amazement through the assembled competitors and spectators. In the club's 30-year history, fewer than a dozen people had ever shot a perfect round in competition, and none had been first-time competitors. Sarah's combined score of 394 points put her in first place heading into the final round. Marcus Thompson was in second place with 387 points, followed by James Rodriguez with 385. David Chen, the engineering professor, had shot 382 points and was clearly frustrated with his performance. The psychological impact on the experienced competitors was obvious. Several were shaking their heads in disbelief, while others were frantically adjusting their equipment as if mechanical problems could explain their deficit. During the break before the final round, Sarah found herself surrounded by club members and spectators who wanted to understand what they were witnessing. Mike, the instructor who had tried to discourage her participation, approached with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I made assumptions based on appearance and experience that were completely wrong. That was some of the finest shooting I've ever seen." Sarah accepted his apology graciously, though she couldn't help but wonder if the same assumptions were being made about other newcomers to the sport. How many potentially talented shooters had been discouraged from participating because they didn't fit the typical competitor profile? The final round would be shot at 150 yards, the maximum distance for the competition and the most challenging test of skill and nerves. At this range, even the slightest error in technique or equipment would be magnified dramatically. The difference between a perfect shot and a mediocre one could be measured in fractions of inches. As competitors took their positions for the final round, Sarah noticed that the entire atmosphere of the competition had changed. What had begun as a routine monthly event had become something approaching a historic occasion. Club officials were carefully documenting scores, and several spectators were taking photographs and videos. Marcus Thompson settled into a shooting position 2 lanes away from Sarah, his movements deliberate and controlled. She could see the intense concentration on his face and knew that his military training was fully engaged. This was the kind of pressure situation where his experience would be most valuable. James Rodriguez was equally focused, using breathing techniques that suggested specialized training in high-stress shooting situations. David Chen was making final microscopic adjustments to his scope, bringing his scientific approach to bear on the challenge. Sarah took her position and tried to block out everything except her target. At 150 yards, the bullseye looked impossibly small through her scope, requiring perfect sight alignment and trigger control. She went through her pre-shot routine one more time, remembering her father's words about focus and respect for the weapon. The first shot of the final round felt different than any she had fired all day. There was a clarity and precision to the entire sequence that seemed almost supernatural. The bullet appeared to travel in slow motion toward the target, and she knew before checking the scope that it had found the center ring. As she prepared for her second shot, Sarah became aware of complete silence around her position. Even the normal sounds of the range had faded to a whisper. She realized that other competitors had stopped shooting to watch her performance, creating an intensity of attention that would have been overwhelming just weeks earlier. Shot after shot, Sarah maintained the same level of precision that had carried her through the previous rounds. Each bullet found the 10 ring with mechanical consistency, as if she were shooting at much closer distances. By the 15th shot, whispers were beginning among the spectators as they realized they might be witnessing something unprecedented. The 20th and final shot of the competition felt exactly like the first. Sarah squeezed the trigger with the same smooth control, felt the same perfect recoil, and saw the same precise bullet hole appear in the center of the target. When she set down her rifle and removed her ear protection, the silence was absolute. The target retrieval seemed to take forever. Sarah could see officials examining her paper carefully, checking and rechecking the scoring. When the announcement finally came, it sent shock waves through the crowd. Sarah had shot another perfect round of 200 points, giving her a total score of 594 out of 600 possible points. More importantly, she had just shot 100 consecutive shots without missing the 10 ring, setting a new club record that would stand for years to come. Marcus Thompson finished second with 578 points, his best score ever, but still 16 points behind a complete newcomer to competitive shooting. James Rodriguez was third with 575 points, followed by David Chen with 572. As Sarah packed her equipment after the awards ceremony, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mockery and dismissal she had faced a week earlier seemed like ancient history. She had proven not only that she belonged in competitive shooting but that she could excel at the highest levels. The bearded instructor who had joked about yoga studios approached her as she prepared to leave. "I want to apologize for what I said last week. That was inappropriate and wrong. You've shown all of us what real talent looks like." Marcus Thompson also stopped by to shake her hand. "I've been competing for 22 years, and I've never seen shooting like that. You have a gift that comes along once in a generation." As Sarah drove home that evening, she thought about her father and the lessons he had taught her about perseverance and self-belief. She had honored his memory in the best possible way, by refusing to be limited by other people's expectations and by pursuing excellence with determination and humility. The local newspaper would run a story about her performance the following week, calling it the most impressive debut in regional shooting sports history. Several sponsors would contact her about supporting her development as a competitive shooter. But, for Sarah, the greatest victory was much simpler. She had proven to herself and others that skill, preparation, and determination could overcome any amount of prejudice and preconception. 100 consecutive targets in the 10 ring. A perfect shooting performance that would be talked about for years to come. And, most importantly, a young woman who had found her calling and proved that she belonged among the very best.